What is going on, everyone? Lauren Sisler here with AL.com. Happy Monday to all of you. Thanks for joining us for another edition of SEC Insider. This one presented by Milo's, our good friends at Milo's, staying with us throughout the the draft season, if you will, as the NFL draft wrapped up earlier over the weekend. Mike Rodak joins us now to do a little breakdown of that, to discuss where some of the top players went. Obviously, some that missed out, very few that missed out, but we'll get into that. But first and foremost, we do have breaking news coming up at, this earlier in the morning, I should say. Alabama picking up a high-profile transfer and a wide receiver from Ohio State. Mike Rodak, share some news with us. Give us the good news.
Yeah, so it's Jameson Williams, who is a very fast, speedy guy out of Missouri originally, who's pretty highly recruited to Ohio State and decided to transfer about a week ago. And Alabama was one of the finalists, and not terribly surprising that he's the pick, or Alabama's the pick for him as the transfer destination, as he announced this morning. And it was a tougher situation for him at Ohio State. You have Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave there, who are both projected as first-round picks in next year's draft. So he played a little bit the last couple of years for the Buckeyes, but I think he had 9 catches last year, so pretty limited contributions. And from all accounts, there was some other younger guys at Ohio State that were pushing him for playing time, and it probably be hard for him to actually get on the field next year up in Columbus. And then you look at Alabama, if you're him, and you have a situation where, you have John Mechie, who's probably a first-round pick himself. You have Slade Bolden, who I think is entrenched in that slot role, but as we've talked about before, Alabama's looking for that other receiver, even third, fourth receiver, if you want to put it that way. And they have all these young guys who we saw a few of them in the spring game, Ajay Hall, flashing, and Javon Baker, Trayshawn Holden. There's a lot of different names, Xavier Williams, but none of them are really proven, and very few of them really have any sort of playing time to their name. So Jameson Williams brings a little bit more experience. I think you know a little bit more what you're getting out of him compared to some of the younger guys at Alabama. And he also brings speed, which I think is the other thing that Nick Saban has really been looking for. He's looked at Keelan Robinson, the running back, playing wide receiver. He's fast, and Saban's talked about it this spring. That's kind of the missing element that they have there after they've lost some pretty fast guys at receiver the last couple of drafts. And that's I think going to help him get on the field in Tuscaloosa. And I think it kind of stabilizes that position, which, I think he felt really good about the running back. I think he felt really good about Bryce Young. I think he felt good about the offensive line once it got healthy. He felt good about tight end. But when you listen to Saban this spring, he wasn't quite as sure about receiver. And I think this helps him out a little bit in that regard.
Yeah, and coming on the back end of that, adding a guy like Williams with that kind of speed, there has been flashes of hope, and Bill O'Brien talked about it in our meetings. I covered the spring game for Alabama, and he said, we've got, our wide receiver room is exciting. There's a lot of excitement, but as you said, a lot of unproven. And so at this point, bringing in someone like that can potentially be in the mix right away, being an asset to the team will certainly be beneficial to them, as they are replacing such talent, which gets us into the NFL draft and the amount of talent that Alabama lost. Real quick, if you could just sort of give us a quick rundown, 10 guys from Alabama getting drafted that tied Ohio State, just kind of going down the list. I'll just read them off real quick, and then I just want to kind of dig into some of the bigger key pieces. Jalen Waddle, the first to go off the board at number 6 to the Dolphins. Patrick Surtain went to the Broncos at number 9. Then it was DeVonta Smith to the Eagles at number 10. Number 15 overall, Mac Jones, the Patriots. Alex Leatherwood went number 17 to the Raiders. And then Najee Harris closed out the first round of guys to the Steelers at number 24, with which we had an expectation that's where he'd go, as we talked about, coming out of round 1. And then in the second round, Landon Dickerson, the Eagles. Christian Barmore coming off the board right after him at number 38 to the Patriots. And then lastly, in the 6th round, Deontay Brown to the Panthers, and Thomas Fletcher to the Carolina Panthers. So with that being said, all 10 of those, just kind of highlighting a couple of those that sort of stand out to you that, could potentially have some excitement, especially in their rookie seasons.
Yeah, I think the Waddle versus DeVonta Smith conversation's probably one that Alabama fans are pretty interested in. And obviously DeVonta Smith, had the better career, statistically set almost every record there is in the SEC in Alabama. But I think from NFL scouts' eyes, Waddle's probably the better prospect because of his speed and his shiftiness and just some of the measurables that he brings. And then there's obviously the discussion about DeVonta Smith's size. And I think I've said it on here before. I think that's a little bit overblown. I don't know if that would be a big issue for him in today's NFL, where everything's kind of a track meet anyway. But, there's probably, I think scouts lean towards Waddle, and I think that's probably what played into the Dolphins' decision. I don't know if it was as much what Tua said. I don't know what Tua told the Dolphins front office. And at the end of the day, Tua's playing for his job too. I don't know if I'm the Dolphins management. I don't know if I'm doing everything because of Tua. And there's been, before the legal thing surfaced with Deshaun Watson, there was a lot of smoke between the Dolphins and Texans potentially making a trade there. So, I don't know if the Tua factor was as big in that as it was just Waddle's measurables and what he potentially could be in the NFL. Leatherwood going 17, I think, was a surprise, and the Raiders have made some surprising picks the last couple of years with Mike Mayock, who's sort of an untraditional GM. But I think he's still has a pretty decent floor as an NFL player where he can be a starter there for a while. I don't know if he's a first round value, over the long term, but I think he's certainly capable of being a good NFL player. Christian Barmore was another guy who had a lot of talk going into the draft about potentially sliding and where he'd go. Well, ended up being the Patriots moving up for him, trading up in the second round to get him. And that's probably where he was expected to go, was late first, early second. And whatever questions there might have been about Barmore, there's a good connection between Belichick and Nick Saban. And I think any of those conversations would have been had. And obviously the Patriots felt comfortable with whatever they heard on him. So that was another one. Landon Dickerson going in the second round of the Eagles, like you said, he probably would have been a first round pick if it wasn't for the injury last year.
Right.
Another player who I can easily envision being a 5-time Pro Bowler. We're looking back at this 10 years from now, if he can just stay on the field and stay healthy. And I don't know if we'll get into it in a second here, but Dylan Moses, I think, was obviously the biggest story of day three. Just everybody expected him to get drafted, and maybe not third round, maybe not fourth round, but when he was sitting there in the fifth and sixth and seventh, I would have thought that somebody would have picked him up. But it just seems like the knee injury, the knee issue for him was just something that kind of turned teams off. Maybe took him off their draft board, and obviously ended up going undrafted and going to the Jaguars.
Yeah, so we can go ahead and dive right into that. I think that was, kind of the big question coming out of this with the guys that were available and sort of the expectation. He was most certainly one of those that we thought would certainly go off the board in the, earlier to mid rounds, I guess, the mid round level, as you mentioned, potentially as high as, round 3, and, never came to fruition. And so, I guess I kind of dig into that a little bit more too. As you're a draft prospect, highly touted. You've been someone that's been highly touted for so much of your career. And then, of course, your career being marred by injuries. And, really, he was a missing piece when he would go down with injury. That was a key piece of the defense that Alabama was always missing. And, he just always had he was the communicator back there with the defense, and, was always such a strong, player on the defensive side of the football for Alabama. And then the injuries just kept piling up. So I, as you mentioned, I think imagine that was a big reason that, teams were turned off to him. But if you're Dylan Moses kind of sitting there, I imagine that's just got to be so hard. I know we talked about this when we were off camera. For me, I just can't imagine just the disappointment when you're sitting there with your family and just anxious to get that phone call, and then that phone call never comes.
Right. And that's a guy, like you mentioned, who probably would have been a first round pick if everything had stayed on track for him coming out of high school, being that top 10 prospect, and the way he played at Alabama his first 2 years, all SEC freshman team, and, was preseason All-American before his injury, and just completely kind of fell apart for him with the ACL. And then last year playing through the torn meniscus, and just didn't look right on the field. And I think it was pretty obvious that just, was never quite the same player last year, even though he was still, the coaches in the SEC still picked him as first team, but just didn't quite feel like the same sort of player out there. And now he's sitting here in a position where, it's minimum guaranteed money. I don't know exactly what the exact figure is on it, but it's probably in the tens of thousands as opposed to millions if he was a first round pick in terms of a signing bonus and guarantee. And there's very little guaranteed about a roster spot too. But the Jaguars will be putting him on the non-football injury list, which could buy him a little time. So they call it non-football because it happened outside of an NFL facility. It's more from a liability standpoint on the NFL end. But yeah, potentially, like if the Jaguars really want to stretch this out, they could keep him on that list all year, and that would almost save his roster spot and kind of keep him around the facility. And that might not be the worst thing for him either. But there's a good guy in that room I think he could talk to, and that's Miles Jack, the inside linebacker from the Jaguars, who had a pretty devastating knee injury. You might remember 5 years ago with UCLA, and was probably a early first-round pick by all accounts that year, and ended up falling to the second round, not undrafted, but disappointment there for him just coming back from that knee injury, and probably a guy that Dylan can talk to, in that locker room that could help him out as well.
Yeah, no doubt. And as we kind of wrap things up, commenting here, Randall Lassiter says, if you watch Bama play this year, you saw Dylan Moses was one of our weak spots on D. Love Bama more than anyone, but the truth is the truth. So, certainly the injuries and if things had stayed on track and not put him behind, I do think things could have turned out differently for him. But hopefully, being able to sort of change the wave of things, get healthy. And, the hope is that he can have some success and kind of move up the ranks there in the NFL. So kind of last thing as we wrap up here, I wanted to go back to the quarterbacks real quick. Just interesting enough, obviously we talked to Jalen Waddle and then Jalen Hurts and DeVonta Smith. So kind of a cool, unique thing. When you think about it, just on the outside looking in, when guys like that get to go play for their former quarterbacks, what kind of asset is that to these teams to be able to go back and get back together, because they know each other more than anyone, right? And, have spent several years creating that chemistry, building on, knowing exactly where they place the ball, the technique, all those things. How does that serve both of these teams? Obviously, the Dolphins and Eagles, to have those two duos sort of back together.
Yeah, I'd imagine it's going to help a lot. And it wasn't the only situation, too. I mean, Jamar Chase going back with Joe Burrow in Cincinnati was another one. And Trevor Lawrence reuniting with Travis Etienne with the Jaguars as well, as running back. So, it's always tough to transition to the NFL. I know a lot of the people around the NFL always think it's tougher for wide receivers just because of some of the intricacies of that game and that position, and the complexities of the offenses at the NFL level as well. So if you have somebody who can explain it to you, in this case, Tua can explain the Dolphins offense to Waddle. Jalen can explain the Eagles offense to DeVonta Smith. That helps a lot. And, I remember covering Tom Brady in New England, where you have these young wide receivers come in and they don't know what they're doing. They don't know where they're supposed to do. And the quarterback can't trust them. And there was wide receiver after wide receiver who came into New England, young guys, draft picks, who Tom Brady just cast away essentially because he couldn't trust them. He didn't throw to him. So he threw to the guys he could trust instead. Julian Edelman, Gronkowski, those guys. And it's tough to kind of break that ice, so to speak, and get on the quarterback's level, essentially mentally, when you're on the field, when things are moving quickly. So if you have somebody who's worked together with you before, I can imagine that's going to help a lot.
Yeah, definitely. And last thing, as we close things out, I know I keep saying I'm going to let you go. Mac Jones, kind of an interesting story there, getting picked up number 15 to the Patriots. And after hearing from him, one thing that kind of stood out and that we've sort of highlighted on AL.com is, that he sort of talked about really wanting to land there at the Patriots. Just sort of your thoughts, because you mentioned that the relationship that Saban has with Belichick, and just the relationship there and sort of the system that Alabama runs, and now he gets to transition there to the Patriots. Why is this such a good fit for him, and how do you think he'll, perform at that level?
Yeah, I mean, the Patriots kind of moved away from it a little bit last year with Cam Newton and how they ran things offensively. But 20 years before that with Brady, it was you needed a pocket passer who gets rid of the ball, who puts it where it needs to be, who's accurate, who moves around in the pocket a little bit, but not necessarily needs to be a runner or needs to be a guy making crazy plays outside the pocket. And that kind of fits the description of what Mac is best at, what Mac is good at. And, the Patriots, I think, would have I think if we were having the same conversation, if they had picked Justin Fields instead, we would have just said the Patriots adapted their offense and, kind of made it what Justin Fields wanted. And in this case, I think they don't really have to change it as much because it already is what, Mac Jones is about. So, it's a good fit. I certainly think that. I do think that there's questions at receiver still with the Patriots. And, they signed Nelson Aguilar this offseason and Kendrick Bourne, but it's not DeVonta Smith and Jalen Waddle out there. So, there's going to be, I think, a learning curve for Mac just thrown to some different guys. But if he can get the ball out quickly, if he can avoid sacks, if he can avoid interceptions, if he can make the right read, make the right throws, then he's going to be on the field in New England from the Patriots that I've watched for quite some time. I think that's a good landing spot for him.
No doubt. Exciting times. We appreciate the insight as always. And don't forget Najee Harris getting drafted number 4, 24th overall to the Steelers, Road to the Pros. That series is out on YouTube and our social media channels on Facebook where you're watching here. It'll be a 4-part series. I think we'll be releasing that last part coming up soon. But such a tremendous series. Great to see Najee Harris sort of pull the curtain back and get to know him on a different level. And so definitely check that out. And we'll also be excited for the Regions Tradition coming up this Wednesday as the coaches tee off. And I know Coach Saban will be out there playing some golf. It was canceled a year ago because of COVID. So I know this is always a time that the coaches and, some of these celebrity types get together and, hack the golf ball a little bit here and there. So we're looking forward to that. We'll have some coverage on that as well. And thank you all for watching. And thank you all to our sponsor, Milo's. Download that app, friends. Get a free cheeseburger because why not?